fans, wherever you may be, welcome back for another edition of the Seahawks Playbook Podcast. Join your host, Bill Alvstad, and co-host, sports writer and football analyst Keith Myers, as we talk Seahawks football. Seahawks fans, welcome back to another edition of the Seahawks Playbook Podcast. I'm your host, Bill Alvstad, sitting down with Keith Myers. We're in our midweek show. We're going to start our midweek rant show, if you want to call it that. Coming off a loss, we're sitting at 2-4. We've got a lot to talk about: players, coaches, scheme, the season, the trade deadline coming up, the ownership, Jody Allen. All of it is kind of in a conversation as we kind of look forward a little bit, maybe into the crystal ball a little bit as we speculate just a tad, but we're not going to be over the top when we do that because we're just not those kind of people. And maybe we can kind of get into that to lead the show a little bit.
Yeah. And so
welcome in.
Yeah. So really what we're looking at here is, if you go on Seahawk Twitter, you've got people that are Pete Carroll should be fired right now. It's time to move on. Let's go ahead and if you're going to be bad, then do it, so that he can go, so you can bring in some younger guy that's not a dinosaur and blah, blah, blah. We're not those guys. Bill and I aren't. It's just not who we are. It's not how we do things. And so what I wanted to start this show with was, I'm not going to go down the road of should Pete Carroll be fired or any of that, because I just don't think that happens.
It's not the right timing for that.
Well, even if
we need to have that conversation, it's probably going to come much later, maybe even after the season.
And given what he's done in Seattle, Pete Carroll will ultimately probably make that decision. He also, like, Jody Allen's the only one at this point who could, other than Pete Carroll, who can make that decision, because John Snyder, the general manager, is like, Pete Carroll is his boss. Pete Carroll hired him. Right. Pete Carroll is also like team president, so he oversees.
And I need to come out and say this too about Jody Allen, because I've seen this on Twitter. In fact, I had an interaction today about ownership and so forth. And just because you don't see Jody Allen out front, in front of the franchise, does not mean that she's not completely capable. She's not completely aware of everything that's going on with the team, the comings and goings, the decisions that need to be made, the decisions that don't need to be made, the decisions that are left for people that know what they're doing specifically in an organization like the Seahawks. She's hired extremely high-end executives to run this ship, and she pays them very well, and she kind of stays out of the way. So for me, as a fan, a lifelong fan, I appreciate an owner like that, actually. Somebody that stays out of the way, doesn't get overly involved. Jerry Jones, thank you. And lets people that know what they're doing make the decisions. And that's what's going on right now. So just because you see that, you see what you don't see, doesn't mean that when the time comes, should that time come, where she needs to be involved and she needs to make decisions will be made, and they will be made swiftly and decisively. And I'm pretty confident of that. So let's just put that out there right now, but we're not there yet. And so to speculate about all of that is just not our thing.
And it's not
and we'll have plenty of speculation as we go in, here and there mode and so forth, because that's fine. And that's okay. And we should think about outside the box type stuff, and it's fun. But just to be over the top and like just start throwing stuff at the wall to see if it sticks is not really our thing. We try to come from a place of being realistic and really knowing the franchise, knowing Pete Carroll and John Schneider, and the way the club operates is kind of where we're coming from. So let's just stick to that.
Yeah. And so to start this discussion the Seahawks are 2-4. They're not a good football team. They're starting quarterbacks out, although really promising news on his recovery and how quickly he's
that doesn't surprise me.
He's starting to get range of motion back in his finger, and he's stretching it and doing it. Ultimately, I think he'll want to play sooner than the team doctors will let him because the bone extension.
Yeah, he needs to, if he can get to the bye, let's just get him to the bye. I would feel much better about that. I know he's going to want to come back against Jacksonville or whatever. I don't even think he's capable of coming back on the designation.
Yeah, because he was placed on IR, so he's out for 3 games.
As soon as he could come back would be the Packers. I would be fine with that, especially if Seattle can take care of the next couple of games. If they can take care of the next couple of games and come out of this thing with a 500 record, and then you've got Russell Wilson coming in, I think that's very hopeful. I think you need to do that. I think the idea out there of, the season's over, therefore we should just tank and throw it all in and maybe hold Russ out for the next 8 weeks or for the season or whatever. Come on. If we're going to be 500 going into the bye, that's a realistic place where you can catch fire and kind of do some damage and sneak up on teams and so forth. So that's still in play here.
The Seahawks also don't have a first round pick. So the idea that you're bad, so you tank for draft position.
We're not those people anyway. We're not that kind of a franchise, and Pete Carroll is definitely not that kind of a coach.
Well, and it's unless you're in a position where you can go, you're bad and bad enough where you can put yourself in position to get a Trevor Lawrence or that kind of thing. You should never tank for draft position. It's just dumb. The draft is too much of a crapshoot. This isn't like the NBA where the top 5 guys are well established and you want to get yourself in a position with a lot of lottery balls to get one of those 5 guys. There's just, it's not a great spot in the NFL. I mean, do you want our higher picks? Sure. I mean, it would be nicer if the Seahawks picked in the top 10 once in a while so they can get a left tackle. But they're not going to. They don't have a first round pick this year. So they need to be playing to play. They need to be playing to get better. They need to be playing for all those things and not tanking for draft position. So I just want to throw that one out there. But that doesn't mean that they can't reach a point this season where they're done and they can make some changes this year to make next year better.
Well, I think that, that's a good point, Keith. And to coincide with that too is, there are all no moral victories here, right? We just, it is what it is, but you can start to begin to evaluate individual players to find out if we do a reset or we do have to do a rebuild, what are we going to rebuild around? Like, what are the things that we have in place that we can rebuild with? What can we add to it? There's a considerable amount of cap available this year. I think somewhere in the neighborhood of $85 million to start with as a baseline. I know that's going to go down a little bit before we even enter the season with some extensions and so forth. But let's talk a little bit about that point in this season where you reach it and you just kind of know. Like, is it when playoff contention is eliminated? Is that the time, or does it come before that, Keith?
I think there's one possibility where it can come significantly earlier than that, and that is losses these next 2 weeks to New Orleans and Jacksonville. I mean, part of it's Jacksonville. If you can't beat Jacksonville, even with your backup
that would be
quarterback,
6 losses in the first 8 weeks.
Yeah, they would be 2-6 coming off.
And there's only 2 teams in the NFC right now that are ahead of us, record-wise, believe it or not.
Yeah. So, but yeah, I mean, 2-6, right? You will have lost to Jacksonville in there. You're heading into your bye, and it's just before the trade deadline.
And you're going to face the Packers and Cardinals after the bye.
Yep. Oof. So you're looking at you're very much looking at the possibility of 2-8 after 10 games.
And it's over. Yeah. It's over. Let's just be real.
And so at 2-6, I think that's an opportunity because you're before the trade deadline.
Okay, let's talk about this really quick. So there's a lot of stuff to talk about here, but let's talk about the trade deadline. But let's also talk about what that really looks like to fans, being 2-6 at the bye, with the Packers and Cardinals on the horizon and possibly Russell Wilson returning. people are these losses. If you're going to lose against New Orleans and Jacksonville, currently the 1-5 Jacksonville Jaguars with a new quarterback, new scheme, new system, new coach, etc., and you lose to that team at home, there's going to be a lot of question marks, not just about this season, but about the roster, about the trade deadline, about the coaching, about everything. Like, there will be nothing that's left off the table for discussion. So how do you kind of bring it back and hone it in and make sure you're really doing the right thing for the franchise?
Well, the thing is that there's going to be a lot of questions and a lot of discussions about the future of Pete Carroll. But Pete Carroll is going to make that choice. I think
that choice, no matter what, is probably going to happen at the end of the year. It's not going to happen during the season.
True. But that's one way or another. But ultimately, like, this will be one bad year that Pete Carroll will have had in his entire time with Seattle that started in 2010.
Okay, but what do you say about the folks that count the years that even though we made it to the playoffs, we were 1-out and expectations were higher?
I'm sorry, I don't subscribe to that. You
got to take a look at the overall winning record of the franchise in the last 10 years, second only to the New England Patriots, really.
I mean, yeah, and this is a team that wins every year. It makes the playoffs every year. They've had a lot of one and dones the last few years, but they were in the middle of a rebuild that was supposed to culminate this year. And the roster is in part because the pandemic, and it caused the salary cap to drop instead of going up, and other problems. There's some draft misses that really hurt and other things. But, last year the team won the division and looked good at times during doing it. And this year, they were supposed to be better and they're not. And there's lots of factors into that. But I think in the end, the big, huge, massive changes that some people want, I think they're not going to happen. I want to talk not about getting rid of Pete Carroll, because I don't think that's wise. I don't think that's right for the franchise this point.
Unless it's right for him.
Unless it's right for him. If he looks at where this team is and is like, I don't want to go through a big rebuild.
Right. And Keith, let's talk about this a little bit, not just briefly, because, there's a lot to talk about, but there's timelines here that you have to start paying attention to. Pete Carroll's timeline, Russell Wilson's timeline, Bobby Wagner's timeline, Jody Allen's timeline, Ken Norton Jr.'s timeline, all sorts of other players' timelines. All these timelines are kind of need to fit a little bit. I think Russell Wilson is at the top of that. It's like, does his timeline on his current contract at his age coincide with a rebuild? So that's a big question that's going to need to be answered right away. It's like, do you build a franchise, if you're going to rebuild everything, as Russell Wilson being your centerpiece? And that's a big decision. And who makes that decision?
Pete Carroll makes that decision, him and John Snyder. Because if Pete Carroll's not, unless because
this is probably, we're talking, when you're talking about this significant of a rebuild, it seems like it'd be like at least a 4-year deal, a 3-year commitment.
If this is a down year, and so you have two other years where you're not great but building, and then you need to be back in the playoffs and competing after that. And I think this team can get there. And I think Russell Wilson,
is he patient enough to wait around for that to happen?
That's the problem. Can John Snyder sell him on the speed of the rebuild, and that you're going to be able to get back faster than that? And if he can, we can keep Wilson around. If not, Wilson's going to want out, because he's going to want an opportunity to go get championships. And I wouldn't blame him. He's in that part of his career where
could he help the franchise? I know it's going to be a setback. And I want this to be a brief conversation, because this is a longer conversation and we have much more to talk about. But the idea of Russell Wilson being the biggest chip the franchise has to reclaim assets to help not just one position, but spread that asset accumulation over a larger swath of the team. So Russell Wilson could, we've already talked about the idea of maybe fetching 3 first-round draft picks, maybe a player, maybe an additional pick or 2 in the later rounds. Do you take a deal like that comes forward to you in an off season where you are rebuilding and don't have a first-round draft pick? Is how enticing does that look to you if you're John Schneider?
See, and that's a question. God, it really how big of a rebuild do you think this is going to be? Do you think this is
well, it's certainly a defensive rebuild. Let's just start there. We know that.
Is it a 1 or 2 year rebuild?
It depends on if it's a coaching rebuild. Like if it's a complete coaching overhaul with a defensive rebuild and an offensive reset, including possibly a new offensive coordinator because the whole thing is going. We're taking a look at 3 or 4 years at least, and Russell Wilson's probably not going to want to stick around for that.
True,
now, if it's a Pete Carroll rebuild and it's a defense only, and it's a defensive coordinator and a rebuild on the defensive side, you keep Russell Wilson and maybe you move on from Bobby Wagner and you take that asset and you turn it into something you could add to.
I mean, because it comes down to the whole big picture is this a 1 or 2 year rebuild like it was last time?
2017, the end of 2017, we knew we were going to have to reset, and we did in 2018 and 19.
9-7, missed the playoffs, came back the following year. 10-6 made the playoffs.
Right.
It was a quick turnaround. Yes, the team was less talented, but they won more. Everyone kind of bought back in, and they went up from there. So what's this going to look like? What do you think it's going to look like if you are John Schneider? If it is a quick turnaround like that, you don't get rid of Russell Wilson. You can't win without him. You can't.
And he's under team control. And he's under team. Let's just put this out there. He's under team control, under team contract for 2 more years plus franchise tags. So theoretically, you could keep him for 4 or 5 years, and not his choice.
Yeah. And you can't win without a franchise quarterback. You can talk about assets and first round picks and all of that, but it doesn't matter how good your roster is. You aren't winning a championship without a quarterback. Right.
So Seattle wouldn't even do a deal unless it could get like a top 3 pick. And this is not the year to be picking in the draft for a quarterback, and we don't have a first round pick that we could use to combine with whatever assets we were able to get to move up. So,
and this isn't a good quarterback year.
Right.
I mean, the Bears offered him, 3 first round picks, another like a 3rd round pick, and a couple of defensive starters. And the Seahawks said no, because there was no path to a quarterback. And they want to compete. They don't want to start over. But that doesn't mean that you don't get a spot where this year is ended and you're looking at next year. Because I think ultimately, look at Pete. He's 70 years old. He doesn't want to go through a 3-year rebuild. He wants to compete.
Every year.
He wants to compete every year. And you don't do that by trading away your franchise quarterback. You just don't.
Okay, so let's take that off the table, at least for this discussion. So let's say we lose the next 2, Jacksonville and New Orleans. We get to the bye, Packers and Cardinals, possibly likely losses. Let's just call it what it is. We're 2-8. It's a rebuild. So Pete stays, Wilson stays. We know the defense needs to be completely revamped. Where does that start, and how does that look?
Well, I think at that point you start looking at what assets do you have that are movable?
First of all, do you start with a coaching change at the top, defensive coordinator?
Absolutely.
Okay.
I think you need to. Because you're going to be starting over, and I think you have to kind of make that call and do what the Seahawks did last year on the offense, and that's just kind of reset the scheme, get some new blood, some new ideas,
reset the scheme. You think with Pete Carroll as the coach, maybe Pete Carroll kind of steps back a little bit on the defensive side?
Not completely, not in the same way, but maybe you bring back a guy like a Dan Quinn or a Gus Bradley or someone who's been here and has
Chris Richard.
Someone has been here, they've left, they've learned some things. Now they bring those things they learned back to this system, and go with it that way. I think but
I would love to see it. Now, you and I talked about this too, the Chris Richard thing, a familiar face, a guy that's been very successful on the defensive back side of the equation for the Seahawks, went on to do some other things, maybe earns an opportunity to be a DC. And I think that would be a good fit for this team and a good fit for Pete Carroll, a guy that he trusts, but a guy that I think that I trust.
I don't know if Chris Richard would come back here because of the way he was let go.
We'll see. So, it really depends on, I don't know the inside scoop on that. But.
So, but anyway, so looking at this, so let's say they get to that point and you're going to rebuild, but you're rebuilding not for 3 years from now, but for next year. How do you get from where you are right now to competitive next year?
So who do you build around? Let's talk about that. So who on the team right now do you keep and rebuild around?
Are we talking?
Can you name me 5 players?
Wilson, Metcalf, Lockett.
No, on the defense.
Okay. On the defense,
yes.
I'm building around Darrell Taylor.
Yes.
I'm starting there, building around Darrell Taylor.
Alton Robinson.
And just because you don't have
Puna Ford's we just signed Puna Ford for like a 2-year extension. Yep. So Puna's going to be there.
Puna's going to be there. I think you're also going to look at DJ Reed and Trey Brown as guys that you are going to,
and Jamal Adams.
Adams,
unless you can trade Jamal Adams, but he needs to rebuild his value. But
yeah, and the way he just signed a massive deal. His contract isn't really credible. So you've got some guys to build around, and I think that's really what you have to do.
You didn't mention Bobby Wagner.
I didn't. He's in the last year of his contract. He's also older. And it's to a point where if you are bad and you're looking to rebuild a little bit, but even if you're rebuilding for next year, you've got to get younger. You've got to get faster. And Bobby Wagner. So do
you think you could trade Bobby Wagner either at the trade deadline, which I think is too soon, or in the offseason before free agency? So
why would you wouldn't be able to trade him? I guess next year he has 1 year left on his contract with for 20.
But it's at $20 million. He'd have to get traded to a place that redid his deal. But
yeah, I think if you could trade him now and get a high draft pick, and then you move Brooks into the middle.
You realize that when you say trade him now, you're talking about within 2 weeks, because the trade deadline is after the Jacksonville Jaguar game before the bye.
Yeah. So
that's 2 more games with Bobby Wagner under Seahawks uniform. I mean, people are going to need to take a moment here and talk about. Let's do that. We're talking about a 2-6 Seahawks team that's looking ahead to next year. We're going to go to an ad. I think that's what I'm trying to do. We're going to go to a break. We're going to talk about the DraftKings sponsorship that we have on the show for the podcast side of this show. And so here's the ad. Okay. For everyone else, let's get right back into it. So Bobby Wagner.
Because I think he's going to be the guy that's going to give you the most return. And so if you can move him and move Jordan Brooks into the middle and get an opportunity to evaluate.
Jordan Brooks might actually be better in the middle.
Yeah. I mean, his skill set is that he's the, he was the heir apparent to Bobby Wagner the moment he was drafted, but getting a chance to truly evaluate him in the middle instead of on the outside is useful as you prepare for next year. And getting
that is very true.
And if you look at, you have a team that is got championship aspirations this year, and they know they need the defensive help, and they're willing to part with their first round pick. So you're going to get something in the late 20s or early 30s in the draft for a guy that will allow you to really evaluate Brooks as a middle linebacker. Remember, you're not playing for this year. This year's over. You're 2-6.
Well, there's a lot of stuff. So we're not getting any pressure on the quarterback. We're not getting any tackles for loss. We're not defending the pass. We're literally just crap all over the place. So we've identified.
Benson Mayowa is you could probably get like a 5th round pick is for someone who's looking for a pass rusher.
I think he's just signed for a 1-year deal though. You're
not looking these people.
Oh, you mean this year?
This year. We're talking about trading him this year right now because you're pulling the plug on this season.
There's no assets that anybody wants on this team.
Yes, there are.
Benson Mayowa, no.
Yes,
nobody is going to flip a pick for Benson Mayowa, Keith.
They will take the pass rusher with a proven track record.
They'll maybe, but it's likely that they're going to pick him up on waivers, or
only if you cut him.
Or
we're not talking. This isn't an off-season move. This is an in-season move for a team that's there. They're trying to go win a title. They know we need another pass rusher. Who's available? You're not going to go you're not going to be able to trade for a TJ Watt, but you can pick up a situational guy that'll play 20 snaps a game. And that's who Benson Mayowa is. And so if you can trade him for a 5th or 6th round pick, and that way, as a Seahawk team, he doesn't have a future here in Seattle. The guy who does is Alton Robinson. So you ship Mayowa off for a late round pick, and you play Alton Robinson more snaps. If you can, those are the types of moves that you can make and increase your draft capital to make you better next year. And it's not forcing you into a 3-year rebuild.
Okay. So let's take a look at the best case scenario. Maybe not the best case scenario for rebuilding, but the best case scenario for this year. Seahawks win against New Orleans and Jacksonville, reach the bye at 500, go to the Packers on the road, and then the Cardinals at home, and they split those games, and they end up 500 after the 10th week. Is that they're still at what 7
games? Yeah,
with 5 losses.
They'll be 5-5 with 7 games left, and you're getting Russell Wilson back healthy. So
they could theoretically still get to 10-7 or so.
Yeah, at that point, you're looking at getting your quarterback back.
They'd have to end the season at 5-2.
Sure.
Yeah.
And is it possible? Entirely.
It's possible, especially when you take a look at the Cardinals game at the end of the year at the Cardinals, where they may have sewn this entire thing up and they'll be resting everybody, and the Seahawks will need that game desperately, and that could be another win. So there's some possibilities here that you could sneak, but let's be realistic. We're not talking about the Seahawks being in the Super Bowl. This is just to uphold a tradition of playoff football in Seattle, but really in name only. This is not a very good team.
Well, at this point last year, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers were not a good team. They were mediocre on offense and fairly bad on defense after 6 weeks.
Yeah.
And what happened? They pieced together a couple of wins, and you're like, okay, so they won, but they didn't look great. And then it started to come around. And as they got closer to the playoffs, they started playing better. And by the time they hit the playoffs, they were a dangerous team.
It can happen. I know it can happen. It can happen in the NFL. It happened to this team in 2015.
Yeah. And so with the Seahawks,
we were 3-3 in 2016 or 2015, by the way.
Yep. And Russell Wilson had just hurt his ankle, and then the following week hurt his knee on the opposite leg. He had 2 bad wheels.
Yeah.
Didn't miss a start.
Right.
But managed to come out and play the team, and get them into the playoffs again. They got hot down the stretch.
Okay, so then still a
possibility.
That ruins your idea of doing anything at the trade deadline. We kind of stay pat. We're not good enough to really go out and get anybody at the trade deadline. We just kind of stay flat. We go finish the rest of the season, maybe limp into the playoffs. Who knows what happens at that point? Okay.
You just got to get into the tournament and see what happens.
So that seems like the best case scenario for this team, given where we're at currently. But it's not out of the realm of possibility. So when you talk to fans out there just giving up right and left, and heads are rolling and all that kind of chatter, we're saying it's not quite time yet to have that conversation. That conversation can be had, but let's see what happens in these next two games. These next two games are really crucial.
These next two games are really crucial. And so if you're John Snyder, you're planning for both. You have conversations in place to see if maybe you can get a cornerback, and find some team that has one, that's in the last year of his deal. And so you can give him up, toss a 5th round pick at him and get a cornerback that can come in and help. But you've got conversations in play with contending teams that might need that extra pass rusher or might need a big splash and fixing a defense by getting a Bobby Wagner and seeing if you can, pick up. You're not going to do both. It's going to be one or the other.
There's going to be no better time to get value for Bobby Wagner than a team that's contending that needs Bobby Wagner. That would put them over the top. I mean, they could literally toss because a team like that is going to be a late round pick anyway.
Yep.
So they're thinking late round first round pick, or Bobby Wagner. Let's get the deal. We've got 1 year left on his deal. We could probably extend that, turn a 1 year deal into a 3 year deal that's backloaded, and let's go get him.
Kansas City Chiefs.
Wow. Yeah.
I mean, let's face it. What they need help on defense. Their defense isn't good. They need leadership on defense, and they could use a linebacker that does the things that Bobby Wagner does.
Interesting.
And with him, they become a much stronger Super Bowl contender than without him. And that's not just because he's awesome, but it just means it's a fit of need. And yeah, they're looking at as a team that,
and as a Super Bowl team, a Super Bowl culture there, having a player come in that's already been to the Super Bowl twice himself is instant credibility on that team.
Yeah. And so, and you're looking at, from their point of view, they're like, our worst case scenario is that we're going to give up the 26th pick in the draft for 2 years of Bobby Wagner. And our best case scenario is we're going to give up the 32nd pick in the draft for 2 years of Bobby Wagner. Like they would do it. I really think they would do it. But we're also talking about John Snyder needing to have those conversations so that he's ready if the team goes 0-2, and the conversations for acquiring a cornerback or, that kind of thing that needs to happen if the team goes 2-0. What do you do if the team goes 1-1? They lose this week to New Orleans and then they beat Jacksonville,
which is the likely scenario.
It really is the most likely scenario.
And we're still 3-6,
3-5,
3-5 at the bye.
Yep. 3-5 at the bye with those two really rough games
with
coming
an outside shot at a wild card, at the last wild card.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know.
It's a rough spot to be in, but
it is rough.
You've seen the Rams start to drop back, and Arizona's kind of doing its thing. And
I don't think we need to worry about Arizona anymore. You said that earlier. There's no reason to really pay attention to the Cardinals anymore. They're in a class by themselves. They've established that. I think they're on their way, and they're not a factor in where Seattle needs to be.
Yeah, at least not
in the playoffs.
At least not right now. I'm still not convinced that I'm not convinced that they're not going to drop back to the pack. I don't think they're as good as their record and
it's possible.
National pundits.
Where it's possible. I think they could lose to the Seahawks.
Twice.
It's entirely possible the way that it kind of works out this way. Okay, I think that's enough. We could speculate for hours, and we do, but there's more to this conversation. I think this is just the beginning of the conversation.
And we'll have conversations like this probably throughout the year, unless this team gets hot.
Yeah. And the it's an unusual spot to be in, to be completely frank. I mean, it's I didn't expect this when I did my predictions at the beginning of the year, as you did. I was fairly optimistic. I was more optimistic than you were. I thought this team had a chance to get to 13 wins and go the fourth year with an increased record. They had an extra game to do it this year, but it didn't seem like it was out of the realm of possibility given the roster on paper looked outstanding.
We really thought the defensive line was going to be better.
Yeah, I'm still not sure what's going on there. I really am not. I just haven't quite figured it out yet. But
I know, because it was such a thing to get Carlos Dunlap back, and he was so good for the team last year. And then they had to deal with the cap and all of that stuff, but they were able to get him back on the roster. And with Taylor and everyone,
and Robinson coming back in his second year, and Kerry Hyder coming in, who had 9.5 sacks last year in the same defense.
This was supposed to be the defensive line was supposed to be this great strength that was going to help them
coming back.
That was going to help them cover up the fact that the cornerbacks were bad. And instead, it's been this glaring weakness instead of this great strength. And that's why the defense is one of the worst in the league. Is because
I think having Jamal Adams, if they put Jamal Adams at the line of scrimmage and threaten to blitz him on every play, maybe that helps. Because then that opens up that they need to account for him, and so that opens up, one less double team on Dunlap or whoever else. So anywho, okay, Let's wrap this up. Follow Keith on Twitter at Myers NFL. I'm at MW Seahawk. The show is at Hawks Playbook on Twitter. SeahawksPlaybook.com is our website. Follow us on your favorite podcast and YouTube platform, and subscribe. So until next time, go Hawks.
Go Hawks.
Seahawks Playbook Podcast listeners, thanks for joining us for another edition of the show. You can find us on Twitter. Bill is at NW Seahawk, Keith is at Myers NFL, and the show is at Hawks Playbook. You can listen and subscribe to the show at SeahawksPlaybook.com.